Serious, ex-prisoners of Reddit. Who was the most evil person there, and what did they do that was so bad? My mom was locked up with Selena's murderer, and we all know what she did. Every Mexican woman wanted to kill her, so they kept her away from everyone. Not in prison, but I was an intern in a public defender's office over 10 years ago, and the one that stands out was a juvenile locked up for the third time for raping kids aged 2 to 4. Kid was obese and clearly very damaged. This was a juvenile detention center that was often used as a babysitter by cokehead moms. Accuse the kid of a crime and get them locked up for the weekend so they could go on a bender. He was serving a sentence. I was warned going in there that he could turn violent at the drop of a hat, and the attorney was nervous about bringing a young female in, but I insisted. The kid looks me straight in the eye and says, "Don't let me out. I will do it again." I can't stop. He was hunched over, dead eyes and completely serious. At least he knows and is being honest about it. I'm glad he's making the effort to keep himself locked up. That's got to be the skinniest sliver of a silver lining ever. I'm here. I did 5 years in Leicester and Featherstone Priscilla NS in the early 80s. One guy in Featherstone was a lifer and had done 30+ years. Apparently he used to frick young boys and cut their dongs off. When he was arrested, he had a fresh dong in his pocket. Too bad the police didn't get there sooner for the owner of the fresh dong. One of the women on my wing cut up her lover and put his body parts in an empty TV box, then put the TV box on his mother's doorstep. Not sure about most evil, but interesting story. When I did time, I was bunked up with a guy who had stabbed his uncle to death. Guy was insanely mean, but when lockup came, he was super nice to me. He was 23 but couldn't read or write, so we would dictate letters to his girlfriend and I would write them for him. When my dad went to jail, he was shocked by how many young men couldn't read or write. He made a lot of important friends because he was one of the few people able to help with legal paperwork. The words "I shot that bee in the stomach and I hope they both die" were used in reference to a 15-year-old pregnant girl. I won't ever be able to forget that one. English guy here. I spent 4.5 months in prison in 2018. There was a guy who was really nice. Seemed like a genuine guy. That was until I found out he strangled his drunk wife to death and left her there whilst he went to work the next morning. There was also this dude in his 40s. This was when I was at the county jail, before being shipped off to state prison, who was a janitor at an elementary school. He was weird with a giant Star of David tattoo on his back and blonde highlights in his longish bowl-cut black hair. He sodomized 2 girls, 9 and 11, with a broom handle. I think his charge was sodomy with a foreign object. I remember everyone feeling contempt because we knew that in that county, sex offenders got off easy. Fortunately, we were wrong. He was given life. I remember the paper he got from court read: release date, deceased. There was another chommer who RP'd his 3-year-old daughter, and when his wife caught him, she freaked out and called the police. He ran from the cops in a car and drove off a cliffside. Whether that was on purpose or not, I'm not sure. But here is where it gets worse. So after the accident, he couldn't talk or act normal. He was essentially retarded, would shuffle around and rock back and forth anytime someone talked to him. Brain damage is what people said from the car crash. People were nice to him until they found out his charge, then ignored him or were cold towards him, but he was retarded at this point, so no one went out of their way to harm him. This went on for maybe 7 or 8 months, but people started to say he was full of crap because gradually he started acting more normal, or people would catch him acting more normal than they believed he tried to portray himself. Eventually, it became obvious he could not keep up the charade any longer, and everyone knew he was faking being retarded. People started freaking with him and tormenting him. People peed on his laundry bag. Trustees banging their brooms on the side of his cell wall to make him start going crazy and crying. He had a single cell in the corner. He was still trying to act like he was retarded but was slipping up and slacking at times, and it became obvious he was full of crap. The worst part is that he only got 4 years. 4 freaking years for RPing his daughter. I got 6 years for robbing someone of their drugs. Anyways, when he got to state prison after being shipped from the county jail, he got beat real frickin' bad. Word travels in the system. I think he spent the remainder of his time in isolation. Even the guards hated him and knew he was lying. Before I got my prison sentence in 2013, I was in Arapahoe County Jail with James Holmes. Was pretty crazy cause they'd put the whole facility on lockdown to move him. even though he was in segregation. 12 life sentences plus an additional 3,318 years for that guy. Deserves it. There was a correctional officer at least 6 feet 5 and well built, and he would always come in peed off. So one morning we are waiting in line for breakfast and he thought he heard this older man call him a B. He followed the man back to his cell and started teeing off on him. The man didn't even try fighting back, and when he fell the first time he split his head open on the steel bunk. The inmate was so out of it he started asking where his car keys and wallet went while he was on the ground bleeding. The CO hears the man and for some reason turns around and goes back and hits him a few more times and says, "Who's a B now?" I'll never forget thinking, dang, this is somebody's father. They're probably both somebody's father. I am 20, was in and out juvie from 15-18 till I went to county jail. The worst people I came into contact was a boy 15 who shot his stepmother, slit her throat, beat her head in with a blunt object, wrapped her in sheets for the father's roommate to find her, then he shot him. Happened in McMinnville, Oregon. Other than that, a lot of people upping siblings and making threats to shoot up the high schools in the area. That's Yamhill County for you. I was locked up with Jodi Arias, so that was bizarre. There was also a woman who murdered her baby and kept it in the freezer. We called her Maytag. I was 16 but tried as an adult, so they kept me in a 21 and under pod. Melvo, the DC sniper, was in my pod. Also, one of the first people I saw in a chain gang was Charles Manson's brother. Swastika on his forehead and everything. Lesson learned, don't be a frick boy. I was in JDC, not doc, but most of the people in JDC were locked up for the same reason as some people would be in doc. I remember talking to this kid and he was kind of stupid in the head. I asked him what he did and he uphead his 10-year-old sister while she was asleep. Most of them were in there for murder, but he stood out since he was a sex offender. I was in a women's prison. New inmate told everyone she was in for tax fraud. Couple of days later, she gets the crap beaten out of her and doesn't leave her cell again. Food gets taken in by screws, and eventually she gets ghosted out. Turns out she was in our side and both her husband and son were in the male side for running a child P ring. Those guys had been put straight in the VP wing, but most female prisons don't have enough sex offenders to have one. It was one of the screws who told some of the inmates why she was in. They wanted her to be taught a lesson. The offenses were awful. She was fully part of it and was responsible for acquiring a lot of the victims. She was trusted by people. Our youngest victim was her niece's 3-month-old who had to be hospitalized due to trauma. This rich kid stabbed his friend in the chest, killing him, but he was on Xanax and weed at the time and doesn't remember anything of it other than his friend on the floor dying. The mad thing is this guy, 18 years old, actually got off with a murder and found not guilty, although was sent down for just under 2 years for possession of a knife. His parents were quite wealthy and it was a big case in the UK. Basically his barristers were the best money could buy and he said that's how he got off. I was incarcerated with over 280 people doing life without parole. There were all kinds: stabbed the neighbor lady 150 plus times, shot a bully in the head in the school parking lot, beat a dude with a hammer, etc. There were 2 that stuck with me though, one where he looked me right in the eye and told me about shooting a guy with a shotgun to the chest, creeped me the F out. Weirdo that kidnapped and killed some girl in his basement was another. John Wayne Gacy actually designed the miniature golf course there. I had a cellie in prison who was a KKK white boy. He was a madman. He was always peed off and would say the craziest stuff like, "Did you hear that? The white rhino is going extinct. Freaking Jews." I was watching the movie about black pilots in World War II and he sat down indignant and rolled his eyes and guffawed. "Black pilots? See Monday." I said, "You really think there are no black pilots?" He said, "Heck no. Have you ever seen a black pilot?" It was like this every day until my move finally got approved. When I was in jail, my cellie was a guy that tied his old lady down to their table and tried to carve "Do not resuscitate" into her chest. Halfway through the cops showed up because the neighbors could hear her screaming. I tried as politely as I could to tell the captain that I don't mess around with woman beaters and asked for a block transfer. Thankfully they put me in work release, which was awesome because I got to work in the kitchen and deliver food to the different blocks. No food hall meals were brought to you and you never left your block except to go to the basketball CT or the library. Well, one day I'm serving food to one of the solitary cells and as soon as the slot is opened a drenching wet magazine gets thrown out. Turns out it's covered in pee and the woman inside is the chick my previous cellie carved up. Turns out she stabbed her son with a syringe of her blood and she was inside too. Some crazy stories all around, but that couple far and away were the craziest people I saw. My friend's dad was a volunteer chaplain, taking care of prisoners' religious needs at the county jail. He came into our criminal justice class to talk about working at a jail. He told us that the most evil people at a jail are the ones that show no remorse for their actions. He saw the guy that killed the foreign exchange student that attended the University of Utah and he told us that the guy didn't seem to care at all. He was calm about everything. Heard a story that some inmates would put broken glass in their fesses and throw it at CO's faces. So when they would wipe the stuff away from their eyes, the glass cuts them. Yup, they mix it with urine as well so as to make it a fine mist. Often it will be allowed to ferment for an extended period of time to make it as putrid as possible. It's called gassing and it's became such a problem in American prisons that they made it a felony. I wasn't an inmate, I was an officer, but at a facility I worked at we were a level 5 which is maximum security. Lots of people who had life without parole and just a bunch of different things happened. One guy was on a documentary because he traveled across several states and killed around 5 people total. He was peed cause the documentary blamed him but he always tried to say his father hitting him as a child made him kill these people. Then there's the old guy who arped his young grandchildren and was furious that he was sent to prison cause they were his grandkids so he could do whatever he wanted. He had also arped his children when they were growing up. Lots of sick things in a max security prison and those would be nothing when compared to a federal supermax. During my time in healthcare there was a security officer that looked like a skinhead but he was not. He was huge like 6'5" around 370 pounds. Tattoos covered his body but they were only just noticeable because he wore full-length shirts with collars. I got to know him and found out he was a retired correctional officer. He worked more than 20 years. He shared some crazy stories. He talked of outright unbelievable stuff but of all the things, this the one of the most horrendous inmates he spoke of. He was a corrections officer in Texas and was over the death row inmates. He said this one was there for kidnapping a mother and her 2 daughters. After raping and killing them, he drove them out to the desert to drop their bodies off. One of the girls somehow survived and made it back to the road where a trucker found her. I'm pretty sure they already executed this guy and on the day of his execution, this security officer at the time telling me this, told the guy I'm going to go home and have a great meal and think of you dying. There's different degrees to evil. One of the smallest black guys and there was so loud and would not stop talking. He eventually freaked out and cut his body up with a razor blade to get medical attention for a different scene. Another guy was young, got beat by a 70-year-old in dominoes. The young guy just straight punched the old man in the forehead. I was reading Molly and Me, and it just sounded like someone hit a watermelon super hard. I looked up, old man was knocked out on the floor. When he came to, these other 18 years old kids were cracking up laughing and the old man was so confused and kept asking why are you laughing? A white guy who was small and young was the Jack Russell Terrier of the pod, and he was the worst. He would just constantly steal and for some reason nobody did anything about it. Guy named Nick looked just like Mike Tyson and would fight white PPL who would work out BC they were doing it wrong. He would also stare at you while you were taking a crap. There was one corrections officer who assaulted me in a bathroom during work duty BC. I didn't know if a roll of toilet paper should be changed out. There was like a 1/3 left. It was my first day. He thought I was fricking with him. After he hit me and was done, I said, so, does it need to be changed? I still don't know. He figured out I was serious and apologized. One CO always snuck me coffee and let me watch football on TV. BC I was nice and worked hard. Hands down. So this lady was married. Husband cheated. Had a full-blown affair. Ended up with a love child. Somewhere along the line the wife is babysitting the husband's illegitimate child. He comes home from work, sitting down to eat dinner and asks her how is the baby? She says I don't know. You tell me? This bee ended up killing the baby, cooking it, putting it in the food and fed it to him. She's doing 2 life sentences. This is in Arizona, by the way. Side note, she looks like the devil. Her eyes are literally black and she looks like she has no soul. It takes a lot to creep me out, but this lady's vibe is def one of the darkest things I've ever felt in my entire life. I've not been in jail, so don't know if this will count, but when I was 19 I was a prison visitor. The one guy I visited was in jail for theft. He'd pick up high value items and just walk out of a store, think £10 K electronics from Harrods, and did it repeatedly. I asked him why he did it so much, as he was not much older than me and had been in and out of jails since he was about 15. His answer: he was attracted to young children and wanted to make sure he could never act on those feelings. His doctor told him, he told me, anyway, that it wasn't an issue because my friend told his doctor he would never act on those feelings and never got him any help he'd asked for. Now, I can guess what a lot of you are thinking. Yeah, right. But he told me about his own childhood, and every word was verified later on. Both his parents had been sexually abusing him for as long as he could remember. Passed him around their disgusting friends to use as they wanted, along with other children at parties, etc. Just over a year of visiting him and he hung himself because he was going to be released and didn't want to be outside in case he did abuse some other child, and left a message saying he wanted to be sure he'd never hurt anyone the way he was. I miss him still and was proud of him, and to call him my friend. I worked in corrections and had an inmate beg for chemical castration because he was a pedo and didn't want to hurt anyone ever again. The state refused his request, so he cut his balls off and flushed them. He never regretted doing it either. I know this doesn't fit the question 100%, but I'll chip in. I was a juror, never been in jail prison, on a high profile murder case a couple years ago. The man was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. We found him not guilty. Long story, as it was his girlfriend that actually committed the crime. This wasn't just any typical murder though. This guy's girlfriend faked a pregnancy, and when it was time to deliver, she lured a pregnant neighbor girl over to her apartment, killed her, and cussed the baby out, intending to raise it as their own. The state got the woman to testify against her boyfriend at trial, so I can probably say that was the only time I've ever been in the same room as someone that is evil. You've been visited by the all-seeing doggers. Good visions will come to you, but only if you comment "Watch me papas." If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.